On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Unfound Podcast Channel on YouTube, I host a live show in which I talk about recent true crime news, I preview that coming Friday's disappearance, and I kind of let everybody know what's going on with Unfound. What I also do, though, is take questions from the audience. Since I know many of you have not yet checked out the live show, today you will get to hear me answer a long list of questions I've gotten on it over the last 6 months. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. What you'll be hearing today is something that I think will become a yearly event for Unfound. As all of you know, we already do an update episode every 4 months. The 5th one of those is coming out in a few weeks, by the way. Then last year, at around this same time, I did the first Q&A episode. But that one came about due to some guests flaking on me. It was thrown together in a matter of hours. However, after conducting that program, I saw how answering questions that I get about Unfound could be very helpful to all of you in understanding what goes on here, between myself, the guests, the assistants, and you, the audience. Because I don't do hardly any of that during the regular Friday episodes, and although I answer many questions about Unfound and myself on Wednesday nights, many of you don't tune in. Not blaming you. You all have important stuff going on, but you really should tune in if you can. Everybody who watches the live show loves it. So today you're going to get a sample of that live show as I go through a list of over 30 questions I've gotten from listeners over the last 6 months. Some concerning me, but most concerning Unfound, missing persons cases, and my attitude toward a whole host of true crime topics. But first, Unfound News. The April 2020 newsletter came out this past Wednesday. Did you get it? If you're on the list, you should have. If you didn't, please contact me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. This one is over 4,000 words long, and these are some of the topics covered. NameUs issues, Devin Bond, remains found in southern Alabama, and Alzheimer's disappearances. I would love to have you on the email list. Next, this coming weekend, the assistants and I will be having a virtual meeting concerning something new that may be coming to Unfound. We already have the episodes, the live shows, the think tank, the books, the website, etc. Well, this is going to be something new. Not just new to Unfound, but something that no one is offering right now. I will, of course, keep you all posted. Finally, how is everybody doing out there? The unemployment percentage and the jobless claims numbers came out a few days ago. Yep, not pretty. And I know many of you are in those figures. I want you to hang in there despite how tough it's going to be. There will be a recovery, and it may come sooner than you think. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, and Facebook. Okay, this is how we're going to do this. I do not have a script in front of me. All I have is a long list of questions printed out or typed out on my Dell laptop, and this episode, as is always the case, is recorded on my MacBook using the program GarageBand. I do not have any notes other than the questions that I typed out in this document, this Word document. These questions are going to come from questions I've gotten recently, let's just say within the last few weeks. In addition, what I did was I went back 6 months to all of the live shows that I've done, and because I have notes, I always come up with a little outline for every live show that, of course, those happen on Wednesday nights. I go back and I got all of those questions that were asked of me for those shows. So that is what you are going to hear now. It's a combination of questions over the last 6 months I've gotten on the live show, and I think it's important maybe to go over those again because I know most of you do not listen to the live show. You should be listening to the live show, but you're not. You know when it is. I know many of you can't listen to it live when it happens on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, but many of you don't. I hope one of these days maybe you'll have the time, and that would be great. But so a lot of you have not heard these questions before, and because you haven't heard the questions, you haven't heard the answers. So a lot of you are going to be hearing me answer some of these questions for the first time. And then in addition, more recent questions that I've gotten mainly through the Unfound Podcast discussion group on Facebook. I will admit that some of these questions you will have heard on last year's Q&A episode. Once again, it was about a year ago, April 2019. But those are mostly questions asking me, in fact, the first question itself, those are mostly questions about the program, why I do it, what got me into it, etc., which I think are always good questions to answer when people ask them. And I'm going to guess that there are many new listeners since a year ago that have not listened to the Q&A episode from last year. So I thought it was important to pick out those really, I think, important questions regarding myself and the program to answer those once again. One more thing, for posterity's sake, if somebody's listening to this 20 years from now, let's say, I am recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic that occurred during the year of 2020. Let's go to the first question. Why do I do what I do? I've answered this question before, but I'm going to answer it again. I think it's an important question to answer because a lot of people have not heard the answer before. I find doing Unfound to work very well with how my mind works. I kind of self-deprecate when I put it this way, but I am not a very good manager of people, even though I have many assistants. You all know who they are. Emily, Cherie, Carrie, Heather, Eric, and Natasha. But I would not call them employees or anything. The truth is, I don't really manage them that much. They do what they do. I do what I do. They keep me informed. And that's how everything works. But overall, I would not say that I'm a great manager of people. I just want to assign people a task, and I just expect them to do it. And for them to check in periodically, on how things are going. That works with some people who are employees or assistants. It doesn't work so well with other types of people. And I just don't like looking over people's shoulders or anything like that. I don't like it. I didn't like it when I was an employee, and I certainly don't like it. I would not do that as a person who runs this program. I have a hard time managing people's emotions and needs and desires when it comes to doing a job. I can be very honest about that. I discovered about myself when I worked at 7-Eleven for 10 months, having to manage a store and have employees, and I did not do it very well, whereas other people are very, very good at that, and good for them. Me, my mind goes much better with information. You give me a lot of information, and I can organize it fairly quickly and get to those points that I think that really stand out, and then passing along those points to you, the listeners, or to any audience regarding any topic that I'm interested in. I think that is a strength of mine, and so I try to exploit that strength with Unfound. Now, on top of that, I've always had an interest in disappearances, missing persons, missing airplanes, missing ships, since I was a little kid, as far back as I can remember. And as many of you know, I have a public speaking background. I have an improv background. I have experiences working with people in which you have to prepare things to present to people. So that all of that, given how I think my mind works, and given my experience over these 49 years, yes, I'm 49 years old, that all comes together with Unfound. That's what I would say. Now, the why. This is important. I don't know how else to put it, but these disappearances are important, and somebody has to give attention to them. Somebody has to bring them to the public. They just can't sit in some file for infinity, can they? So that's also my attitude regarding that. But I think that there's a song by Faith No More. It was a song before they became popular with The Real Thing, but there's a song called We Care a Lot. It came out in about 1987, maybe. And the line of it, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. The truth is, missing persons cases are a dirty job to police. They're not a dirty job to me. I absolutely enjoy this. I absolutely love getting to know these guests and doing everything I can for them, along with the assistants, my assistants that do everything for them. Absolutely. But law enforcement and many people believe it's a dirty job because you can work a long, long time on any one particular case and not get very far. That is a fact. But still, somebody has to do it. And what better person than myself and my assistants and everybody else who has helped Unfound become what it is. Next question. Now, you should know these questions are in no particular order. Really, all I did was go back through those former Unfound Live files, the live show files, and copy and paste them right into a new document. So these questions are in no particular order. They're not even grouped by kind of category or chronologically. It's just whatever question is next is next. Next question. Do I think parents are killing children more now than they did 20 or 30 or 50 years ago? The answer is no. I don't believe that. In fact, as I've talked about many times, the crime rate, the violent crime rate in the United States over the last 50 years is down dramatically. When I was born, August 1st, 1970, the United States was a much more violent place than it is now. That's what the FBI says, and they're the ones who study this type of stuff. So because of that, I would say that there are fewer parents killing their children, we think of Susan Smith, among others, than 50 years ago. I think the perception is exactly the opposite, but that there are more children being killed today than there were back then. I think it's because our perception is that way, or some people's perception is that way, because of the media, because we do have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week media these days, and they have a lot of time to fill. So they're looking for news. Do I think that the murder of every child should be in the news? It probably should. We need to know who these people are who are doing these things. We need to know the adults, the parents who are doing this. But the media today, because it's 24/7, is much more in our face. The internet, our phones, everything. Remember, there used to be a time in the United States not that long ago where people got their news from a newspaper that only came out once a day, 7 days a week, and the nightly news, which was like a half hour long. And that's the way it was for decades, from the time, radio came around in the 1920s up until the mid-90s. Now, of course, maybe you could say it started with CNN. CNN went to 24-hour news service in the, early 80s, late 70s. So we went like 6 decades with a half hour of nightly news and a newspaper every day to what we have now. It's so quaint looking back at it, the way we used to get news in contrast to what we get today. But I think because of that, the perception has changed that the United States, speaking for my country, where I'm a citizen, that it's much more violent than it was, and the stats just don't bear that out. So to answer once again that question, do I think parents are killing their children more now than they did 20, 30, or 50 years ago? I think the answer is no. Next question. This also came from a live show within the last 6 months. Listener asked me, what is going on in cases where people ditch their cars? Is it drugs? Is it mental illness? What's going on there? Why does that seem to happen? Is that some sort of pattern? This kind of references the question that I just answered, going back to FBI statistics. Now, you should know something, that although violent crime has gone down in the United States over the last 50 years, there are 2 big deals in our culture that have gone the exact opposite way that could be connected, that are certainly connected to people's behavior. Suicides are up, way up, since I was born in 1970, way up. The other thing that's up, drug use, drug addiction, way up since I was born in 1970. And what you can learn from that is that violent crime and disappearances aren't necessarily connected. Meaning, violent crime has come down. Disappearances, they seem to have come down as well, but not at the same rate as overall violent crime. Why is that? I would say because suicides and drug use are up. Those 2 aspects are keeping the missing persons graph, from the little line on that graph, from going down as fast as the line is on the violent crime graph. Because we suspect that a lot of these missing persons cases are murders, so it is violent crime. But why is it then that, if that is the case, why haven't missing persons cases, the reporting them, gone down at the same rate as violent crime? I think because suicides and drug use have gone up, and those are surely related to missing persons cases as well. So when you ask me the question about what's going on with people ditching their cars and everything, I personally believe it is connected to people with drugs and mental illness. Something that happened that was going on with them personally that didn't have anything to do with anybody else. Now, can I say that in total? No, I can't. And in fact, I'm sure we can think of some disappearances where cars were ditched where it did end up being a murder. But I even have in my notes here that this person had asked me about Shane Fell. Real puzzler of a case from Louisiana. Was driving home after being at a bar, wrecked his car, called his brother to come pick him up. Brother shows up, Shane's not there, never seen again. How can that happen? And in that particular case, I'm inclined to believe that something did happen to Shane during that car wreck. I think it's very possible that he had some sort of head injury, that he was fine when he called his brother, but he might have gone up over the levee there by the Mississippi River to go to the bathroom, or because he knew he was drinking and driving. At least that's was suspected. He might have gone up there just in case anybody drove by or a cop drove by. And my personal belief is that he did end up going into the river, maybe because of a head injury. That's the best I have for that case. for that disappearance. It's not related to drugs or mental illness, but when we talk about addiction in the United States and people drinking and driving and everything, it all kind of goes into one big category. So that's what I think is going on in many of these situations where people who went missing, didn't have anybody that was after them. There was no reason to believe that they were murdered, but still their car was found somewhere and that person is not there. I think it does have to do with mental illness and or some sort of addiction. Next question. Have any of Unfound's cases been solved? The answer is yes. However, it does depend on what you mean by solved. Some are just totally outright solved. Crystal Morrison. Zoe Campos. She was murdered by Carlos Rodriguez, a person that many people suspected when she disappeared. Some have been partly solved. Laura Bible, Ashley Freeman. There's now a man who's been in custody for about a year now, if not longer, who authorities believe was part of a gang of 3 who murdered the Freeman parents and then took the girls and murdered them too. He's in custody, but the girls' remains have still not been found. Lots of rumors going out there. In fact, there was just a search within the last few months looking down some wells in Oklahoma. Nothing has been found yet. So would you consider that to be solved because you think you have in custody the person, one of the people who did it? I guess in some people's minds that would be solved. Here at Unfound, if it's a murder, we want somebody in custody and we want the remains found. That's what we consider to be solved, or another word that's used is resolved. Tom Brown, remains found, cause of death undetermined, although the coroner thinks that Tom committed suicide. That's not something I personally believe, but some people would say, well, it's been solved. He's been found. They think he committed suicide. That's all you need to know. It's just not as simple in my book. So I would not consider that case to be resolved. Devin Bond, I think it's resolved, but I don't know all the details as to how he ended up where he ended up. There's an article that came out recently that says that they suspected he committed suicide, but even his cause of death is considered to be undetermined, kind of like Tom Brown's. So is it resolved? Don't know. I guess from maybe from a family point of view, a parent point of view, some people might look at, their son or daughter, their remains being found, and that would be enough. For others, maybe it isn't enough. If they suspect foul play, they want the person caught. We just don't know. So those are just a few. Another case that's going on right now that I think is going to be resolved shortly is Andrea Bowman's. Dennis Bowman is in custody. Remains were found on his property, and everybody believes that those are Andrea's remains. They just haven't been scientifically identified yet. I think that's another one that will be solved. However, even I can admit, we've covered over 170 disappearances, and not many of them have been resolved. These cases are tough. These disappearances, they are the toughest of the toughest of the toughest. And that's why we here at Unfound, we're just trying to move some of these cases forward, trying to get people talking about them, thinking about them, somebody coming forward. And if that leads to some of these being resolved, spectacular. But really, we're just trying to move these cases forward, even if it's just 1 inch, because for many years, many of these cases, you can almost say because of time and nothing being done, they've almost gone backwards. And we're trying to get, investigations moving forward. Next question. I was asked, do you get a lot of people coming forward with info when you cover a disappearance? It all depends on what how you define the word a lot. I don't know necessarily how to define that word, and I think that given the nature of disappearances, we have to be fairly realistic. Of course, my goal with the covering of every disappearance is to move every case forward. That is always the goal. That is the mindset every time I talk to a family, and that's the mindset every time that I come to this microphone. But statistically, realistically, I know that that's probably not going to happen. Still, we give it our best every week. We do get people who come forward and have things to say. How often does that happen? I continue to use this statistic that I think is still true to this day. I think I've been using this statistic for about a year and a half. I think we move about a third of the cases we cover forward. And I think the ones that we successfully move forward and get people talking and somebody comes forward and everything, it's very hard to predict. It's very, very hard to predict the effect we're going to have on every case. It's hard to say. But people do come forward, and the policy that I have is that if I get something sent to me directly, I forward it to the guest for that episode. I do not go to police with it. I do not reply back to the person. Well, that maybe depends, but I send it to the guest, and then we talk about it. Does this seem believable? Is this some kook? Is this some troll? Is this person pretending to be somebody else because that's happened? A lot of different situations you run into over 3.5 years. But that is the policy. And it happens about a third of the time. And it could be that we cover 3 cases in a row where you have somebody after the fact that approaches me and says, oh, I didn't know that disappearance wasn't solved, and they have something to say, and I forward it to the guest. You may have 3 weeks in a row where that happens, and then you could go 6 weeks in a row where you get nothing. So, but people do come forward. New information does come out of these interviews. Sometimes, like I said, about a third of the time. Would love for that number to be higher, but this is a very tough row to hoe. But we know that. I knew that. I know that. And we accept it. But that does not get in the way of working hard every day on these. Next question. I've got this question quite a lot, especially now since the YouTube channel is blossoming. Can I use that word? With Natasha working on it, getting new videos out very quickly, getting the new episodes up on YouTube maybe 4 or 5 hours after they come out on Fridays. Natasha is doing that. And so I've gotten the question, why do you have the comments turned off on YouTube? Whereas many channels on YouTube just allow people to, comment, and they have some policy or something. The reason we don't do it, and that is even though Natasha is controlling all that now, of course, I oversee it and give her some pointers and suggestions and everything. That's my rule. For the simple fact is that I don't want anybody responsible for trying to control all of the comments that you can get on YouTube. It's different in the discussion group on Facebook where people can comment and talk back and forth because we can screen people and you know who these people are. There's some people do use fake names, false names, and I think more people do that than anybody would realize. I realize it, but maybe a lot of just regular users of Facebook do not realize how many people on there do not use their real names. But it's not a free-for-all on there and on the discussion group. Whereas on Facebook, virtually anybody can go on there and write anything. And I just don't want to have somebody who is responsible for keeping their eyes on YouTube 24/7 for the simple fact of just controlling trolls. Like I said, it feels different to me on Facebook because it seems everybody's on Facebook anyway. All the people on there, of course, have an account. Whereas you can comment on YouTube just by having a Gmail account. Could be anybody. And so there's that. The other reason is because when you allow comments, you do not get a true representation of how many views your videos are getting. Why? Because every time somebody goes and comments, they go away, they come back to see if anybody responded to their comment. Well, that person coming back the first time registers as a view. The next time they come back, it registers as a view, and the numbers go up and up and up. And that's how a lot of people can raise their video counts, their view counts, the times of videos played by opening the comments because people are coming back over and over and over and over and over. Whereas that number then of views would not be truly representation of how many unique people are watching the videos. And I think that that is a much more important number than just videos overall. I mean, what if it's the same person watching the same video a million times? It's going to say 1 million views, 1 million plays, but it's only one person. So there are a few reasons. I continue to say that even though our YouTube channel now is as good as any podcast out there, and you should know that not too many podcasts out there do an audio program where that audio is then turned into a video. You go and check that. Not too many. Like, of course, John Lorden, he is a true crime show on YouTube, but he doesn't do a podcast. His show is a video show. There is no just audio. So it's a little different. I'm talking about audio shows that then become videos on YouTube. Unfound is one of the rare podcasts that does that. And it's not easy. Having done it by myself for a while, it's not easy to do that and keep up on it. But Natasha's doing that, and she's doing a great job. So what I'm saying in regards to that is Unfound is an audio program. If people want to comment on the episode for that week, they can come to Facebook, comment on the Unfound page, come into the discussion group. We have like 7,000 people there. If they want to comment, they can do it there. Or if they just want to talk to me, I'm easy to find. unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. YouTube is just one more way. It's not the primary way we get information to people. It is secondary, but that doesn't mean it's not important to us. But it is still a secondary venue for the program, and we would choose instead to drive people when it comes to commenting and really talking about a disappearance, drive people to places like Facebook and the discussion group, etc. In contrast to, once again, on YouTube, where it seems anybody can say anything. There you go. Next question. Do we file FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act requests? Do we do those? Generally not. Not for disappearances that we are working on that could eventually become episodes. Why is that? Because I'm sure you've listened to other podcasts where they do that. The problem that I have with that is I don't like, this is just me, I don't like waiting around for stuff like that. Because anybody knows who has tried to file for you, it's kind of like, well, they'll respond to you within 30 days, but that doesn't mean they're going to get the information to you in 30 days. It may take a few months, maybe longer. I know we were working on a FOIA in 2019. Dr. Eric Grabowski, once again, one of my assistants, was working on something. It took him like 10 months to get the information. Now, if you really think that we're going to wait 10 months to cover a disappearance, because of paperwork, that's probably not going to happen. Moreover, in in knowing about FOIAs and having actually filed some after the fact for some disappearances, even some cases that we may never cover on Unfound. A lot of times the paperwork they send you is not that enlightening. And that's what I've found, that I can get that information just talking to the parent of a missing person. I don't need police paperwork to tell me what I can get in an hour from a guest, whereas it take me 6 months to get it from the police. I mean, you know. So, and even in the case with what Eric did last year, and once again, I still can't talk much about it. We're looking for something in that information that I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with the disappearance we covered related to that FOIA. We're looking for something totally different that we probably couldn't talk about on an episode anyway, because it's that top secret. Just to be honest, I'm not hyping anything. You know I do not sensationalize anything. So that's why FOIAs, as far as doing the weekly episodes that come out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, FOIAs are not a relevant part to that. The waiting is too long, and if I thought I was going to wait 2 months to get a really excellent piece of information, if I knew it 100% for sure, then I suppose we might wait around. But nothing is guaranteed with these FOIAs. And because it's not guaranteed, I'm not willing to wait around until some, red tape bureaucrat sends me, a bunch of paperwork through the mail. That's just the way I look at it. Next question. Have I ever met any guests? I have. And this is one of the few parts of this Q&A of today in which I actually typed out who I've met. I just mentioned Dr. Eric Grabowski. Even though he was one of my assistants, he did not start out as an assistant. He started out as a guest on the program going way back to 2017 for the Donna Mikalenko episode. If you haven't listened to that, I hope you'll go back and check it out. That came out, I'm going to say, April 2017, maybe March or April 2017. 3 years ago. Hard to believe. I just don't know where the time has gone. But, of course, met Eric. I've met him actually a couple times in Pennsylvania. We're both originally from Western Pennsylvania. Now that my mother's deceased and his mother has passed away as well, both of our fathers still live in Western Pennsylvania, although not near each other. And he also went to the same college that I went to after I was there. And so we've met a couple times in person. If you really want to technically know, we've met at the Eaton Park in Irwin, Pennsylvania, twice. That's where we've met. Joyce Rivituzzo, Peggy and Patty McDaniel's mother. I've met her at the Missing Persons Day for Florida in late 2017. Once again, seems like yesterday. I've met her, and I talk to her on the phone maybe once a month. I love talking to Joyce. She lives up in the Panhandle. Donnie Smatlak's parents, I've met them once. They're from Western Pennsylvania. I met them maybe during the summer of 2017, maybe. I think so. And I met them. Of course, I've met Tom Brown's mother, Penny Meek, when I went out to Amarillo last summer. I've met Lee Clifton, the guest blogger, the guest for the Kelly Rothwell episode. She lives here in the area because Kelly Rothwell disappeared just like 2 miles south of where I live now. I've met Lee, although it's been a while. Wonder how she's doing. I've met Lisa Kassoon, Chip Campbell's sister. She also lives in the Tampa area, and I've gotten together with her husband many times. In fact, I've gotten together with her more than any other guest on the program. I'm going to say we've gotten together 7 or 8 times. I've met the rest of the family, too, once again last summer. And then finally, I got to meet Cindy Fox, who is the mother-in-law of Lacey Buenfil. And I met Cindy actually before she was on the program. not after. So that was maybe a unique situation. There was all these other situations. I've met these guests after they were on the program. In Cindy's case, I met her before when I drove up there, and she took me to some of the locations that are important regarding Lacey's disappearance. So those are the guests who I've met. I would love to meet more of them. I have a great time. I've had a great time meeting all of these people in person, and I would certainly, like to make that happen. However, with current conditions, with lockdowns and stay-at-homes and self-isolation and quarantines and everything, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that for probably quite a while. Next question. This maybe gets into a little more of my personality and doesn't have anything to do with the program, but there are a few of these questions mixed in here. What makes me laugh? Maybe the best way to explain that is to tell you maybe some of my favorite movies that are comedies to maybe understand my type of humor. Here's the kind of humor I don't get. Like The Life of Brian. What is that called? That's funny. I'm having a mind block right at this second. Monty Python. There you go. I didn't have to even turn off this microphone off the recording to figure that out. Monty Python humor goes right over my head. I don't get it. I know people are obsessed with it. You would almost call it some type of cult or something. A lot of people love that. I don't get it at all. I'm more like Mel Brooks humor, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Spaceballs, History of the World Part 1. Blazing Saddles is one of my favorite comedies of all time. Of course, the joke now is that you probably couldn't make that movie in 2020 because of all the things that go in that movie, but I find it to be one of my favorite of all time. More recently, of course, it's way back in the 70s. More recently, one of my favorite comedies is Tropic Thunder. I think it's a genius of a movie, and maybe I find it funny because I used to work in entertainment and worked with actors, and that's really what that movie is about, and it hits it spot on. Spot on. And if you've ever watched that movie, what you need to do is to listen to the director's commentary with Ben Stiller, Jack Black, and Robert Downey Jr. And Robert Downey Jr. stays in character for virtually the entire commenting on the movie as it plays. It is just as funny as the movie itself. So that's kind of my taste in comedy for movies. Me, I love making plays on words. I will admit, I love double entendres. I love messing around with words and sentences. Maybe that's because of my writing background and making jokes out of words. And if any of you follow me on Facebook, just my private Edward Densel account where I hardly ever talk about Unfound, that's usually what I'm doing, playing around with words. Word comedy, I guess, is the best way to put it. Maybe you might call it a very dry sense of humor. That's kind of me. Some of my favorite stand-up routines. Although I'm not big in going, I've never been big in going to comedy clubs or anything. But I love one of my favorite, and it's PG rated, is Brian Regan's. Well, I landed on the moon. I walked on the moon skit, which you can find on YouTube. I find it absolutely hilarious. On the other hand, I think that Eddie Murphy's Raw is also very, very funny. So I guess I have a wide range of taste when it comes to stand-up comedy. But those are the things, type of comedy that I like, and my type of comedy that I think I create myself is usually dry humor based on playing around with words, things like that. Next question, another personal one about me. Would I go back to Vegas? Yes, I would. And in fact, it is nice a place. I live here in Clearwater Beach. A lot of people, I think, would love to live in Clearwater Beach, would love to live in Florida given the temperature and all the things to do, and the water, and the beach, and amusement parks, and everything else. I would go back to Vegas, and I certainly have a plan to go back to Vegas one of these days. It won't be this year. Maybe next year, maybe the year after. I don't know. But I love that city. And probably because those years that I spent there, 13 and a half years, were very important years in my life. And I have a spectacular collection of memories from there. Made so many friends who still live there, and I still communicate with them. And it's a fantastic city. And I have to admit that I do miss being able to go to the sports books, and I miss maybe choosing to enter a poker tournament once in a while and things. You have that here in Florida, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same. I mean, when you feel like you're going to a Vegas casino and do those things, it's like very highbrow. And that feeling never goes away. So anytime you go anywhere else, it's a huge letdown. I've been to the casinos in Pittsburgh. I've at least been in the Hard Rock Casino over on the other side of Tampa. It's just not the same. And once you've been to Vegas and done all those things, everywhere else is going to seem like a little bit of a letdown. And that's what's supposed to be. Las Vegas is supposed to be number one. So, but I would, and I hope to one of these days. We'll just see how I'm going to make that happen. Next, has anybody ever been found alive yet, as far as any of Unfound's cases? The answer is no, unfortunately. No. I'm not saying that I don't believe some of the missing people that we've featured aren't still alive. They very well may be, and in fact, I could probably pick out some off the top of my head right now, but I think that would be, wouldn't be the right thing to do. But I do believe that at least a few of the missing people who we featured are still alive. Or maybe I should have put it this way. Did not die right after they were last seen. They might have been living for months, if not years. Just depends on what age case you're talking about. But I'm convinced that a few of the missing people continued to live and not be chained up or held in somebody's basement or anything like that, lived free lives for a while after their disappearance date. Yes. It's just that none of them had been found yet. All the cases I've already talked about earlier. Unfortunately, the only way some of these cases have been resolved so far is through the person being deceased, unfortunately. But it will. I know that it will be certainly a very special day. It's going to happen sooner or later that we feature a missing person and then missing person is found alive. It's going to happen sooner or later. That's what the stats say. I just don't know when it's going to happen, but it will be a very, very special day. Next question. How many cases have we covered? I have to admit, I did not count them before coming to this microphone today. And by the way, I'm recording this on April 1st, 2020, so April Fool's Day. But given everything that's going on, I don't know how many people are really in a laughing mood. But Unfound has covered around 170 disappearances, 170 episodes where we've covered a missing person. Now, within those episodes, though, we had multiple people, maybe like the 3 young men who disappeared whilst allegedly scuba diving. They were from Canada down here in Florida 25 years ago. There were 3 people featured in that disappearance. Laura Bible, Ashley Freeman, 2 people in that disappearance. Molly Miller, Colt Haynes, 2 people in that disappearance. More recently, we featured another couple who disappeared together down in Texas. Over in Texas, I should say. So even though there have been 170 episodes where we've had disappearances covered, we've covered 180 some actually missing people. Then if you want to count in Flight 370 with all the people who are missing from that jet, 200 some, then the number goes way, 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 way up. I don't know how the person who asked me this question wanted me to calculate it. But let's just say we've done over on or around 170 episodes where we talked about individual missing persons cases. Now, in addition to that, this person at the time asked me, how many of those do I believe are solvable? Well, I believe they're all solvable, theoretically. Theoretically, they're all solvable. Even going back to the oldest case we covered, Mary Jane Van Gilder's, a disappearance we just featured recently. They are all theoretically solvable. But realistically, and I don't enjoy saying this, but I'm always going to be honest with all of you. When it comes to any topic regarding Unfound, we're going to either talk about that topic and we're going to talk about it brutally honestly, or if we can't do that, then we don't talk about it at all. But I'm going to be totally honest with you that, I'm 49. Let's say that I live to be 80. I think that would be spectacular if I made it to 80 years old. I realize that 30 years from now, some of these cases will still be unsolved. And that will not be necessarily anybody's fault. We'll work hard at it. There'll be law enforcement who are in charge of it. There'll be family members trying to solve it, solve their own particular disappearances. And still 30 years from now, many of these 170 cases will not be solved. And it sucks. I don't know how else to put it. I'm not a pessimist. That's not being a pessimist. But I think I've been doing this for 3.5 years, and I just know. You have to, once again, looking back at Mary Jane Van Gilder's case, or Evelyn Hartley, who disappeared in the 1950s. Evelyn's is what she disappeared in 1952. So that would be born in 52, so 48 plus 20. That case is 68 years old. And I'm probably going to live for about another 30 years. So it's twice as old as the years I have left to go, probably. I hope I make it to 80. I hope I make it to 100. Maybe not. We just don't know. Just don't know. Every day is a gift. But that case is over twice as old as probably the years I have left. That's why I say a lot of these cases could still remain unsolved for years and years and years and years. And once again, it sucks. But they're all theoretically solvable. But somebody has to remember something at the right time. Somebody stumbles upon something. Somebody finally gains a conscience and comes forward. A lot of that stuff has to happen for these cases to get solved. And oftentimes that doesn't happen. Next question, am I going to become a private investigator? This is a topic that became quite popular later in 2019. Somebody had asked me about it during a live show, and it started a lot of people saying, oh yeah, you need to do that, Ed. You need to do that. You need to do that. And I will admit that I've thought about it, but given everything that's going on now, nobody's going to be becoming a private investigator in Florida, or I think anywhere, as long as these stay-at-home rules and these quarantines and everything else are going on. I think all of that stuff has been suspended, I suspect. Still thinking about it, still considering it. What would it add to the program? I don't know. However, as I answered back at the time when it was first asked to me, and any time that it has come up since, I would become a private investigator simply for the simple reason of trying to add some credibility back to that profession. I just hear too much about crooked private investigators and people and taking people's money and running off, and I think the way to change that is to get better people doing it. So if I'm going to put my money or my body where my mouth is, then that means that I should become one. I don't know if I would ever use the license or anything. I just don't know. Now, I will tell you that, the big problem of living here in Florida, I've heard that there are some states where becoming a private investigator is fairly easy, and that may allow people who shouldn't be doing it to get their licenses and claim to be private investigators. So, it's like a two-way street. I would love an easy process to become one for me personally, but I understand why it's not easy to do for the reasons I just stated. The issue that may be here in Florida that kind of turns me off is that there's, taking tests, and you have to get like a mentorship, and you have to be an intern and I start reading stuff like that, and my eyes start to glaze over. Whatever that stuff is, if most of you have never met me, I think you get a good sense of my personality on the live show, and especially in programs like this where I get to talk for a long time. I really prefer interviewing people, but these Q&A episodes I think are important, as are the update episodes. So where I do all the talking, I think they're very important to the program. I think you get a good sense of my personality, but since most of you have never met me, when you start telling me about, having to do an internship and taking tests and being on probation for a couple years and, whatever all that stuff is, I'm the opposite of that. Really. And so my eyes start to glaze over, and then it starts to feel like my personality just doesn't go well with those types of things. So personally, I will have to jump some hurdles, I'll have to jump some hurdles in my psyche to become one here in Florida. But like I said, I don't think I have to think about that now, because I'm guessing they've kind of put that all on hold as everything that's been going on here. I'm sure that government officials are doing a lot more important things right now than worrying about anybody who wants to become a private investigator. Of course, social distancing. And how do you do an internship while you have to social distance at the same time? I don't know. So that's the answer. Still thinking about it. But there are going to be some things that psychologically I'm going to have to think about, because I guess what I'm saying here is that there's a reason that I do this program. As I've already stated, I'm not a very good manager of people. I think I've been a good employee for the jobs that I've had going way back to, high school into college, summer jobs. I think I'm a decent employee and everything, but that's when I was 20 something and 30. I'm going to be 50 and you have to do an internship and everything. I don't know, but I will continue to consider it, because I do believe that the private investigator profession, the quality of people in it needs to rise. And I'm not shy saying about that. I've been more than honest about that. And if somebody wants to challenge me on that, I can give them all the stories I've been told by families. I can give them all. So I give all of it to anybody that wants to criticize what I'm saying about that. So, and I hate hearing every one of those stories. And so to do something about it, it may be that I have to be in a position where I can speak to these other people doing it as a colleague instead of just somebody in the media who's criticizing them. Maybe the best way to improve them is to have somebody in that community who is one of them who can say, hey guys and women, you guys got to raise your game here. Do you know how you're viewed upon by people who have used your services? Not very well. And I think a fellow colleague, coming from a fellow colleague, means a lot more than them hearing it from what I am right now is, I'm a reporter who's not in that community. And they just may view me as, just some guy looking for some attention, which I'm not, but they may think that. This is a really good, this next question is really good. And I appreciate the person asking me this, because sometimes I know I just take some of these things for granted. How would a person start their own investigation into a missing persons case? Not a person who is a private investigator, not somebody who has a law enforcement background, just your average person, an accountant, a teacher, an engineer, a person that works at Starbucks. How would those types of people with those backgrounds, having no experience in investigating anything, how would they go about doing that if they feel compelled? I would compare, and being I have experience in this area, it's easy for me to talk, but this is the first thing that comes to mind. Doing an investigation, something that you're going to devote a considerable amount of time to. Now, here on Unfound, we do a different disappearance every week. Whereas, as we know, there are podcasts out there that devote many episodes to one disappearance or one murder or one series of murders or any type of crime. They devote multiple episodes to one particular case. Whereas here on Unfound, we devote one episode, one case. So it's not like we can do that here, what I'm about to explain. However, I will say, on the other hand, that last year in 2019, I worked myself considerably hard, put in a lot of time with the Cameron Remmer disappearance, a disappearance that is still in the forefront of my mind. And I think that over the course of 2019, I certainly exposed, and we, of course, eventually did an episode on it in late 2019, and where I talked about what I did. Certainly put a new light on that disappearance, and certainly brought out a lot of information that has never been covered in Cameron's disappearance. And it certainly I think it could point people in a particular direction that has never been considered before. Now, how do you go about that? How did I go about that? I look at it like writing a novel. This is something I have experience with. I've written several long fiction novels. You have to plan it out. Novels are not written off the tops of people's heads. I know that's very romantic to think about Ernest Hemingway or anybody else, that's how they write books. Not so. They have an idea, they sketch out ideas, how the character's arc, the scenes, the settings, the words. They have a very, very firm outline, and then they go to their typewriter or their computer. And even today, if you can believe it, some novelists still write their novels pencil and paper, if you can believe it. So that's the idea that I have. And that's the idea that I had with Cameron Remmers. And I think it worked out fairly well. You have to be able to know the disappearance well, get to know what is on the record already. That's the first part. Then the second part is besides the obvious as to if you believe the person was murdered, who did it, you have to figure out what are the things that are missing among the facts. That's what you have to figure out next. And how are those facts going to help lead you? How will they help lead you to more other information that maybe at this point you don't even know you need? For me in Cameron Remmer's case, as an example, the thing that stuck out to me as soon as I talked to his mother and read about the disappearance and everything is it seemed to me that the part of the disappearance that seemed to have been very vague was him getting kicked out of the Fairmont Hotel. It seemed very vague. Nobody knew at the point that I started, nobody knew who the security guards were that night. Nobody knew exactly
what Cameron was doing. Nobody even realized that the security guards that work at the Fairmont don't actually work for the Fairmont. They are contracted out. Fairmont contracts that work out. And so one by one, I eventually got to the point where I did find out who the security guards were who were working that night. And you know what happened then. Neither of them really wanted to talk, which could tell you something. But it took a while to do that. Even something as simple as what I just told you in like 20 seconds took me months to get that information. But you have to stick to your outline. So that's how I would describe it. You have to outline everything first. Don't sit down and start calling people and emailing people. What is going to logically make sense? And so outline may be a page long. It might be 10 pages long. Where do I logically start? What logically progresses from that? What logically progresses from that? And if I run into a roadblock with one of these things, what are alternatives that I can do? And on top of everything else, it never hurts to go back to the base material, going back and reading the original articles from the time that the person disappeared. Of course, it also helps talking to the family like we do on Unfound, and anybody else that they think might be helpful, which is also what I did in Cameron's disappearance. But you have to have an outline to follow, because there will be days where you wake up and you're not sure what to do. On those days that you're feeling like that, you just go, what did I write in my outline? What am I supposed to be doing today? That's how novelists write books. They have a certain word count that they're going to put in every day, and then that's it. And then they get up the next day and they look at their outline as, where am I? Where was I? Oh, this is where I was. Okay, this is what I have to do today. That's how they do it. And that's the best way, I think, to go about doing your own investigation as well, especially if you have no background in that area. Next question. I think this is a great question, given that we just did an in memoriam for Crystal Morrison recently. Have any of my opinions changed on disappearances since I covered them? The simple answer is yes. Now, I couldn't tell you which cases those are, because it would take me quite a bit of time to go back and look at every disappearance that we've covered and go through all the material again and really reassess them. Although I do that periodically, but for me to do all of them at one time, I mean, would be quite an undertaking. And as you know, we have stuff in the present to do. But reassessing is something that you can do when you have some spare time. But I'm guessing yes, that if I were to go back through every case and listen to every interview again and look at my notes for every that I took on every discussion that I had with the guest, I'm thinking that would be the case. Why? Because as I wrote in the recent newsletter that came out today, Crystal Morrison's disappearance, I believe, is a very, very important one in Unfound's existence. This is one where many people, including myself, thought something of an overdose or violent nature happened to her, and we now know that that is not the case. That's not the situation. That's not what happened. And because of that, anytime that you are given, you're shown that your suspicions were wrong, I think the natural inclination, it should be anyway, if you're being open-minded and you truly care about solving cases and you can put your ego to the side, is that you have to start reassessing at least some of the disappearances that you've covered. And so I would say, yes, I'm not going to be on the record and tell you, if I were to go back and look at some of these disappearances and maybe change my mind, I would never do that, because I think that that's something probably that I would just keep between myself and the guest. But certainly, and as I already did in, was it last week's live show? Last Wednesday's? I made the point of, I even read off some disappearances that are similar to crystals and saying maybe these cases need another look because the circumstances are very similar to crystals. We suspect that somebody could have walked off, which we didn't expect in crystals, but we now know that that's what happened. So the person that asked me the question, I know who it is because I do have the names, but I didn't want to get into any names. These people know who they are. I thought this was a great question, and I believe that my opinions would change if I were to go back and really, really deep dive into some of these disappearances. Again, the ones that we've covered, that things aren't so clear. Some of these other ones, I think, for example, I think Rosemary Rapp's disappearance, I think it's fairly clear. Suzanne Lyle's disappearance, fairly clear. Whereas Jason Jolkowski's, not clear at all. And some others, not clear at all as well. So you'd have to limit yourself to the ones where there's a few different possibilities, and then look at those and use it, but using Crystal Morrison's as a template. So I believe my opinions have changed, but I'm not sure which cases those would be. This is a good question. You should know after every answer that I give, I stop recording and take a couple minutes to couple of seconds just to take a breath, take a drink of water, because my voice is really not used to talking for this long unless it's on the live show. But I have a chance to look at the next question and figure out what I'm going to say. That's what I've been doing. You might not be able to tell in the recording that I'm hitting the stop button on GarageBand, but I am. I'm not doing this all in one take. That just keeps recording. I'm going one question to the next. What does my family think of the podcast? Okay. You should know my mother, who is deceased now, loved the program. She was always asking me about it. She listened to it every week. We had talked about some of those, the episodes and disappearances and everything, and she had all the books. Just like you would think a mother would be, who is very involved in her son's life. And as I've said many times since she passed away November 28th, 2018, that the last conversation I had with her was about this program, and she said how important it is. And how, I was talking about, well, Mom, I'm going to come up and see you. And she goes, well, I don't want that to get in the way of the program. That's what she was telling me, even though she was about 10 days from dying. And by the time I got up there, she'd already been drugged up and had the air hose put in her, down her throat and everything. It's just, I really don't like to think about that stuff. But my mother took a deep interest. Everybody else, kind of hit and miss. They are not required to ever ask me about the program at all. I really don't care if they ask me about it. It's something that I'm going to do no matter what. I'm not looking for approval from my family. I'm not trying to, get in anybody's good graces, or that also is the opposite of Ed Densel. Whereas I think there are a lot of children out there who feel some responsibility to follow in their parents' shoes. And I know some of my friends, they're living the exact same lives that their parents did. Exact same. And that was never going to be me, ever. And so because I've decided to do my own thing, I don't expect my family or any time to ever ask me about what I'm doing at all, even though I think what I'm doing is, of course, very, very important. And I think that we are affecting many people by doing this program in a very positive way. Still, I never expect anybody who knows me to ask about the program. That's just the way I am. I'm gonna continue to do it whether they ask me about it and say, oh yeah, I'm listening and it's great and everything. It's not that I don't care. I hope they all listen. But I'm not looking for any approval from them or anything else. So I think they think that I'm doing just fine. As far as my dad goes, he asks me about it once in a while, but it's not really his thing. Missing persons, true crime, and all that stuff, that was my mom's thing. My mom watched the ID channel, all the forensic files, and all that stuff. She'd been into it for years. Dad, not so much. And I think that start talking about the program. I'll tell them what's going on once in a while. If there's something really, really noteworthy, like speaking of colleges or something. Other than that, it just doesn't come up. My brothers and my sister, never ask about it. Never ask about it. That's fine. I'm not criticizing them. But if somebody's going to answer the question, I have a responsibility to ask the question. I have a responsibility to answer it. They have their own lives. They have kids. They're married. They have their own jobs. You know, they're working on things. Their own stuff. I don't ask about their work, so I don't know why they should ask about my work. That's my attitude. But I'm just doing my own thing out here. And that's also just kind of who I am. I'm just going to do my own thing, and that'll be that. Whereas I think, and I appreciate that my parents realized that about me and never gave me any hard times about it. I think I have deep respect for them because of that, because I know many other types of parents have expectations. You have to do this. You have to do that. You are expected, blah, 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 blah. My parents were never like that. They wanted me to be a good person, and I think I am. But other than that, that was about it. And I appreciate that them bringing me up gave me the opportunities that I was able to make choices about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And they never gave me a hard time about it, even though I'm sure in a few cases they wanted to. But I think that's what being a parent is. I'm not a parent, but I think that's what about being a parent is. Sometimes you're just going to have to accept that your kids are going to do things, although the choices they're making are moral, ethical, and legal. They're still not choices you like. You just have to bite your lip. I think that's one of the requirements of being a parent. So there you go. Next question. What percentage of cases Unfound has covered involve corruption? Not very many. I think that when we start getting into that area of law enforcement not doing what they should have done, and they should have done this, and they shouldn't have given this car back, and they should have done forensics over here, and they should have talked to this person. I'm not convinced any of that has anything to do with corruption. I think it mainly has to do with people being put in positions where they don't know anything about what's going on. Although there are many, many thousands of disappearances, the odds of any one particular police officer, investigator, police chief, sheriff running into a missing persons case that runs longer than a month, the odds of that happening is still very, very low. So when one of them does happen, it's no surprise that they look, a little inept. It's just the way it is. That would be the situation for any particular person in any particular job. Engineer, teacher, Starbucks worker. What were the professions I named earlier? Accountant, teacher, Starbucks worker, barista, engineer, anything. You get in these patterns of what you expect of your job and what you have to do, and then all of a sudden, something out of left field that you've never encountered before hits you. And most people, if not all people, are probably going to react in an inferior way. They're probably not going to react in a way that it is up to professional standards, in contrast to what they are used to with their job. I think that that has a lot to do with a lot of what we talk about. Now, has there been corruption? Yes, but that's not generally what that's not my knee-jerk reaction in these cases. Could it be, for example, in Megan Lancaster's case, being that she had her little black book and the chief of police was in there and Mike Moran and everything that's gone on in Portsmouth, Ohio? Okay, sure. Hemphill County, Texas, being that Sheriff Lewis is no longer sheriff, there was certainly some malfeasance, to use a word from the movie Fargo, the movie Fargo. There were certainly some things going on in that sheriff's department that shouldn't have been going on. And then you can just take that from there. I'm not going to have the Tom Brown battle all over again as to what happened. It's just not the right venue for this particular episode of Unfound. But there were certainly things going on there in that sheriff's office that shouldn't have been happening, between the fake paperwork, between Pine Gregory writing people up when he shouldn't have been and getting fired. Yeah. And I'm sure we could think about some other situations where we have police departments that had situations that shouldn't have been happening. But I'm not sure. I guess what I'm saying is, just because you find something wrong with a police department in a certain area doesn't mean that there was corruption that led to a disappearance and then there's a cover-up. I think that's quite a bit of a stretch. On the other hand, the statistic is still the same that I've been talking about for a year and a half. About 10% of Unfound's cases, a suspect is somebody in law enforcement. But that doesn't mean the entire department is corrupt. It means that particular person is. So when I think of corruption, I think of governmental corruption. Police officers, investigators, sheriffs, deputies, or people in positions of power, mayors, council people. And I'm not sure how much we've really encountered that on Unfound that had anything to do with an actual disappearance. I'm saying it's happened. It's surely the percentage isn't zero, but I wouldn't say it's 20% either. It's more than zero. It's less than 20%. So it's not very common. Another personal question. Have I traveled outside of the United States? I have, although I would never consider myself to be a big traveler. I don't like flying. I used to have a severe fear of flying. Don't have that anymore. I just don't like being cooped up like that. Sitting in that little seat, sitting next to some stranger, looking out a window. I mean, if there's ever a way in the world for humans to feel like cattle, that's it. Now, I mean, I guess anybody would say what I'm going to say. Now, if I had a private jet and could go places, I'm sure I'd do a lot more traveling. I think everybody, if you, of course, pay for the plane and the gas and everything else, the pilots, I think everybody would do a lot more traveling if that was a situation. Private, Learjet or Gulfstream or whatever it is, fly from here to wherever. I'm sure everybody would do a lot more traveling, including myself. But I've been to Canada. I've been to Mexico, but mainly like on a cruise, or I went to a Club Med resort like 20 years ago. Seems like yesterday. I've been to Belize. I've been to Jamaica, Grand Cayman, all those touristy spots for the cruise ships go to. I've done a couple cruises of the Caribbean or the Caribbean, depending on how you say it. I've been to the island of St. Martin. That was going to be 14 years ago. No, 24 years ago. Oh my gosh. 24 years ago. And I have a great story from being in St. Martin. However, I cannot tell it on here. It's a little, it's a funny, it's not an X-rated story. I just can't tell it here, but it's a fantastic story. So I've been around a little bit, but, I have no, you know, I've been to Canada, 30 times, maybe more than that, because of my family going fishing for several decades. I was just there last year. But I just have no interest in going to Europe or Australia or China. Or I don't know. I don't know. I'm not necessarily I'm a boring person. I think I'm a fairly interesting person. But I don't know. My brothers and my sister have been all around the world. My sister was to China a couple years ago. She's been to Ireland. All my siblings have been to Ireland and Italy and Germany, and that's fantastic for them. I'm very happy that they are able to do those things. I just don't feel like I'm missing anything, and that's the truth. I just don't feel like I'm missing anything. I would rather spend my time and money on other things, like going to disc golf tournaments in Florida and spending my money for Airbnbs and motels and things that way. I think I have a much better time doing that than however much money it is to fly and all that stuff. It's a crazy amount of money. I just maybe a little bit of a simpler person. I would love someday to rent an RV and drive around the United States and go to the states I haven't been to yet, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. I think that would be really, really neat. Other than that, if I never leave the United States again, I'm perfectly fine with it. Next question, getting back to the topic of Unfound. Have people asked for help, then never responded? Yes. I probably one of the biggest points that the public doesn't know about this program. Of course, I know it. And my assistant, Emily, who is in charge of finding many of the guests that appear on the program, she certainly knows it. And because of that, the other assistants, I think, have an idea of it, is that how many rejections and how many, I just put it that way, how many rejections we get. It's quite a few. Where we email people, they don't respond, or Emily emails somebody, this person says, yeah, I'd love to talk to you, and then they arrange a time to talk, call, leave a message, they never call you back, you call again, they don't call you back, and then they just disappear. I've had that happen to me. I've had that happen for interviews where I had talked to a person a couple times, everything's fine, we schedule a day to do the interview, I call, they don't pick up, I leave a message, I never hear from the person again. That has happened multiple times. I would say that at least 5 times. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot over the course of 3.5 years, and as many episodes as we have, and how many disappearances we've covered, but you figure when you've put all that time into talking to somebody, you've gotten to know the person and talked in depth about a disappearance and multiple times, and we've emailed back and forth, to them just vanish off the face of the earth. It's weird, but it's happened. And like I said, around 5 times, if not more. I wouldn't say 10. Some probably were between 5 and 10 times. And then we have what is more common is talking to somebody one time and then they just never talk to you again for whatever reason. That's probably what most commonly happens. What also happens is that Emily will talk to somebody and give me kind of the notes, and then she'll arrange for me to talk to the person. I'll call the person. Person never picks up. Never hear from the person again. So what would you call it? The closure rate? I don't even that's the only word that I can come up with. I guess of course, this is not a sales program. We take this is a, trying to help people program. But if we were to come up with a percentage, the amount of people we contact and then the amount of people who end up being on the program, and maybe you compare that to car sales. How many customers a salesman talks to and how many end up buying cars? What is that percentage? Once again, this is not a sales program. I'm going to say probably 30%. It's probably higher than that. Maybe 50%, 1 out of 2. So I guess what I'm saying is for every person who's been on the program, so let's just pick out the rough number 170, we've actually contacted like 340 people. That seems about right. That's probably about right. Emily might have a better handle on that than I do, but I'm also thinking about those early days when nobody knew about the program and you only had 5 episodes out and it had just started. And I mean, there were times where you go for quite a while before somebody would respond. So you have to figure all those in there out. So with that in there, it's probably, no more than 50%. Back then it was probably 1 in 10 or something. So it's probably just 50%. I'm thinking the public would think it would be higher because we do work for free. We are always available. We are definitely trying to help them. We are legitimate. They can go to the program and hear how we do business and everything. You'd think it would be higher, but it's not. So why do those things happen? I don't know. I get to know these people as well as I can over the phone, but they have no reason to tell me other things that are going on in their lives. It very well may be that some of these people are having health issues that they can't talk about, and that's why when you call them, they can't pick up. Maybe they've just been through a cancer treatment or something. There are a whole host of possibilities that probably have nothing to do with the disappearance. So, I think that answer. Have people asked to help and never responded? Yeah. People who seem to be energetic about being on the program and everything, and then they just disappear. You email them, you call them, never respond. Of course, I would never mention any of these people's names. That would be wrong. But it happens. Next question. Which case got me into true crime? That's a little... This is a question that I got during one of the Unfound Live shows, and I have to admit that I forget what the answer was. So I hope I'm giving the same answer as I did back then. I did not go through that YouTube video to see how I exactly answered that question. Here's what comes to me right now, and I think I believe this is the truth. It all depends, I guess, on what you mean by got me into true crime. As I've already stated in here in this episode today, my interest in the mysterious and mysteries and things started very early on, well before I was even 10 years old. With In Search Of, with Leonard Nimoy, and of course, in that program, if you were to watch those episodes now, there's a lot of, a little bit of cheesiness to it, a little hokiness to it, the supernatural, the occult, a lot of things that I don't believe in as an adult. UFOs, and I'm not a believer in UFOs either. But as a kid, as you can imagine, just a little boy living in Gilpin Township, Pennsylvania, it's just, wow, there's this world out there and there's all these things going on. Man, that just sounds fantastic. So I would guess that's what got me into mysteries. Now, whether you would call that true crime or not, I don't know. But getting into the 80s, I can tell you this, that one of my best friends, they're all 3 brothers, they're still best friends of mine to this day. We all went to high school together. Their father was a part-time police officer. And so they had a scanner in their house, scanning the area for the different little districts and jurisdictions in that area of Leechburg, West Leechburg, Allegheny Township, Washington Township, and even the state police in that area. And I can remember going over there and just being fascinated by that. Just being fascinated about hearing that things, of course, this is before cell phones and the internet and GPS and everything. So to be able to hear about there's a wreck here, there's a fire there, and you're just sitting in your house learning about it, and it's happening in real time, was fascinating to me as a teenager. And I'm sure my friends remember that to this day, although we haven't talked about it probably for a long time. So there was that. And then, I don't know, into the 90s, into the 2000s, moving to Las Vegas. I would have to say that I knew about Jody Huisentruit's disappearance in 1995 fairly early on, even though I lived nowhere near Iowa. And I knew, I think, about Jennifer Kessie's disappearance fairly early on, even though at that time I did not live in Florida. But I would say the case that really got the fire burning again was probably Stephen Kocher's case, because it happened within a few miles. His disappearance happened within a few miles of where I was living in Las Vegas at that time. And I've talked about that. I did that episode in 2017 where I spoke about my personal experience with that case and being on the ground and driving to where he disappeared on that street and all that. That's probably what got kind of the fire in my mind going again, in doing research online, if you want to call it that, reading about disappearances, going to NameUs and trying to match missing people with unidentified remains. I can remember sitting in a Starbucks in Las Vegas. I mean, this would have been 10 years ago, doing that. Just passing the time, trying to match one group of people with the missing people with the unidentified remains. And it's very difficult. And I'm going to talk about that. I wrote about that in this month's newsletter. I'm actually going to talk about it a little more specifically before this episode's over. And then probably in the next jump in my interest probably was in 2015 when I came across the Mara Murray podcast. And I came across it on YouTube. And I began listening to it. I'm going to say summer of 2015. That sounds about right when it started, right in there. And it was from there that I started thinking, I could probably do something like this, probably. And then that podcast, I kind of lost interest with it, and just my personal opinion is that this is one of the problems with podcasts or programs that devote multiple episodes to one particular case, whether it's an unsolved murder or a series of murders or a disappearance, is it seems that it's hard to keep that attention span. At least it's hard to keep mine. I get to the point where it's just like, just tell me, let's just go. Just turn all these episodes into one big 5 hour long thing, and let's just get it done all at once. That's why we don't have multiple episodes covering one disappearance on Unfound. That's why some of the episodes are 3 hours, because I think it's a little bit of a trick or something when you make people wait, because you got to understand something. All those episodes, once the series starts, they're all done. It's just that they choose to release them only once a week. Remember that. So I thought after about 6 or 7 episodes, I thought the quality of that podcast went downhill. But I certainly did learn a lot about Mara's disappearance, and it's one of the most well-known disappearances of the 21st century in the United States, at least for your average person. Just your average person disappearing, Mara's has to be up there. And that's when I thought, I could probably start doing this. And then, as many people know, I did another podcast before Unfound. I wouldn't say I had a co-host. We co-hosted the program. And that went for about 5 episodes, and I'm just going to leave it at that. During the summer of 2016, and that's when I decided, I think I could do this on my own, and that's when I came up with the plan of the program that you now listen to, and it's still going 3.5 years later. So I think it's not an easy question to answer. What case got me into true crime? That was my progression from In Search Of to friends having a scanner in their home, and maybe Unsolved Mysteries and Cops could be put in there at some point. And then Jody Huisentruit's case, and then Jennifer Kessie's case, and then Stephen Kocher's disappearance, and then the Mara Murray podcast, listening to it and figuring out that I could do something like that, and then eventually deciding to do Unfound. And really it wasn't until around then in mid-2016 that I even knew that there was this huge true crime community with multiple true crime podcasts. I had no idea. Zero idea. And as I like to tell people, I've never listened to Serial ever. So, and I think that's why Unfound continues to be a little bit different than a lot of other podcasts out there, because since I haven't listened to it, I didn't know what it was doing. And I think a lot of people that started their own podcasts did listen to Serial, so they decided to make their program sound like it. And Unfound doesn't sound like Serial because I've never heard it. I think that's why. I think that's why it's a little unique. There's a reason I don't speak in that very NPR tone. And there's a reason I don't have ads, and there's a reason I don't have dramatic music because I didn't know everybody else was doing that. I just figured out, well, this is the way I want to do it, and that's just the way it's going to be. So that was my progression. That's what got me into true crime. I'm going to answer this question. Now, I could easily not answer this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway because I've been asked this multiple times, and it's another personal question. Why am I single? How many hours do we have? I wouldn't say I get this question a lot in my everyday life. I think the people that meet me and get to know me, like people that I worked with in Las Vegas and in show business and at Star Trek, I think they kind of figured it out on their own. And here in Florida, where most of my friends are disc golfers, because of all the tournaments that I've played in, all the people I've met, and the place I've gone to play in clubs, and one of my very good friends here in Pinellas County has his own store, and so I'm very in tune with that community. I think people that get to know me through there understand why I'm single as well. So I don't get that question often. It's usually asked by people who don't know me that well, but find out that I am single and maybe say, well, this guy seems like a nice guy, got a lot of good things going on, he seems fairly educated, takes care of himself, what's the deal? Well, I want you to know that I am a straight guy. I like women. I've dated several women. At 49 years old and being single, I don't think that should be a surprise. But I am a little bit of a hermit. This is why all this self-isolation stuff that's been going on and will continue to go on is not much of a problem for me. Although I know it's a big problem for millions and millions and millions of people for a variety of reasons. Losing jobs. Some people don't like being cooped up. Some people get cabin fever, claustrophobia. I don't have any of those issues. And I've pretty much always been like that. Ed Denzel requires a lot of space. And so when you are like that, if you're a person who cares about other people's feelings, you're going to be like that. Because if you try to portray yourself that you aren't like that, well, then you're putting on a facade. And you can only keep that facade up for so long to the point where you're going to go back to your natural tendencies. And that's going to end up hurting somebody else. And I don't want to do that. So that's why I'm single. The kind of personality and social style that I have is not conducive to long-term relationships where you're going to be living under the same roof and sleeping in the same bed, etc. That's just the way I am. That doesn't mean that, once again, I have had girlfriends, but I've never lived with any of my girlfriends. I had some female roommates, but we were not romantically linked. We were more like brothers and sisters. And this goes way back to 20 years ago. I've actually had 3 female roommates. But since 2011, I've lived by myself. So I can live with other people, roommates in college, female roommates when I lived in Las Vegas. But, I have no tie to them. I could leave. I could end that, housing relationship at any time. I'm going to go live by myself and that's it. Whereas when you're in a personal, romantic, emotional relationship, it's a lot different. So, but I have had girlfriends. I think that I've been genuine with them. But that's why I'm single. And I think it's important for people to understand that there's nothing wrong with being single. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or anything. I think that when people can identify who they really are, then they are going to make themselves much happier. But you know what? You're going to make other people a lot happier too. I think that works both ways. I'm just the person, even here in the disc golf community, I go to these disc golf tournaments. I love playing them in them as long as I'm playing well, which has been a little bit of a struggle until recently. But I get my own place. I stay by myself, and I'm the kind of guy, as soon as the tournament is over, as soon as the disc is in the back and I collect all my stuff, I'm out of there. But while I'm there, I'm friendly, I'm engaging, and that is really me. That's not a facade. I love being friendly. I love talking to people. I love joking around with men and women. Love it. And that is all Ed Densel. That is not a facade. But when the tournament's over, it's not like I stick around to kibitz. I think that's the right Jewish word, right? To talk and sit around, and I got things to do. I got places to go. So I'll jump in the car. As I've joked around, I leave disc golf tournaments faster than anybody on earth. And because I've played well. That's what I came here to do. Time to go home. Whereas other people like to go back and they'll sit around for the trophy presentations and things. That's just not me. So all of that contributes to why I'm single. But I love women. I think I treat them with respect. I think I'm honest with them. I think I've grown a lot in the last, especially 10 years in that department. But I feel very comfortable being single. And if it never happens for me and I live to be 80 years old, I don't think that I'm going to have any regrets about that. Next question. What percentage of all missing adults involve drugs or mental illness? As I stated earlier in this program, I think the percentage is a lot higher than it was 50 years ago because addictions and mental illness, I think, are more common these days. As, of course, we've already, I throw suicide in there as well. What percentage? Maybe we should think about this in a different way. What is the percentage of people who I think were murdered of the case that we've covered on Unfound? I would put the number at probably about 75%. And then the other 25% are a combination of overdoses that were then covered up by people, which I guess in a form is of course it's a felony covering up something like that. But it's not technically murder if the person knew what the person was doing. But, overdoses happen, and most of them are not murder. Most of them are accidents. People who were not trying to kill themselves and did. So there's that. There are suicides in which the method of suicide was in a way where the body couldn't be recovered, maybe jumping off a bridge or overdosing on purpose in some place where a body wouldn't be found. Maybe somebody in a garbage bin did that, knowing that their body would get taken away. People who walk off into the wilderness and die from exposure, like Crystal Morrison did, although she didn't intend to do that, I don't believe. I would say that all of that is covered under the other 25%, including people who just walked out of their lives and are still alive. But I continue to believe that 75% of the disappearances that we have covered on Unfound are murders. To this point, successful ones. And the other 25%, I would say a very small part of that are people who have walked away and are still alive. And so the rest of that, let's just say of the 25%, let's say 2% of walkaways. So 23% probably involve overdoses, suicides, people walking off and being overcome by the elements, etc. That's the way I think it breaks down what I think I know about disappearances. This next one is somebody must be reading my mind. How do I feel when I listen to my old interviews? I don't go back and listen to a lot of my interviews very often, simply because there's no time. There's just not. But when I do, for example, with Crystal Morrison's In Memoriam episode that just happened, I did that for the In Memoriam for Zoe Campos and a few other ones that I've gone back and listened to for a variety of reasons. The early ones, obviously, when you do this as many times as I have, almost 200 times, I'd like to think that I've gotten better at it. I think I have. I listened to some of those old interviews, and I realized that I missed some questions that I could have asked. I think I've become better at being a little more spontaneous when the discussion goes off on a particular tangent that maybe we didn't plan on, because as you should know, all of these interviews are what you would call scripted. There's an outline that we follow from top to bottom. But even so, sometimes we get off on a tangent, and I don't mind doing that as long as it's concerning the disappearance. And I think these days I've gotten better at just going with the flow a little bit more and asking the right questions. And of course, interviewing is all about listening. So I guess what I'm saying is that when I listen to those old interviews, I see a lot of things I could have done better. That's my first thought. My second thought is, on the other hand, I think I'm fairly pleased with those interviews because I had not done it before. And still, I think overall they come out pretty good. Not 100%. Of course not. But so I have a mixture of feelings when I listen to old interviews. I hear things that I missed. And then on the other hand, I think, well, being you had never done that before, you pretty much asked all the pertinent questions, although you probably missed some too. And my interview skills are going to be something that I think will continue to be honed as long as I do Unfound. I think 3.5 years from now, listening to interviews I'm doing right now, I think 3.5 years from now, I'll be looking back at these interviews and saying, you know what, you were doing a pretty good job, but you missed something here, you missed something there. Hopefully I'm improving. Hopefully. This next question is one I got just within the last couple days. It's a long one. What can be done when a case is open and has a new detective, but the detective doesn't really know the case? Are there any suggestions of piquing his interest to give it his pair of fresh eyes? Let me start here. I think all of you now realize, because it does come up quite a bit in our interviews, how many times these cases get handed to new people. You could have a disappearance that's 5 years old, and 5 different people have been responsible for it over the last 5 years. Very common. It is very unusual for a disappearance, let's just pick out a number, to be 12 years old, and for the same detective or investigator to be responsible for it that whole time. Very, very rare. That might not even exist. People get promoted, people get demoted, police officers move from one jurisdiction to other, to another, people die, all sorts of different reasons that files get passed on. So I don't know what can be done about that part of it. I don't know. But as far as when the new detective comes on, then we get into, does a family even know that a new detective is responsible? A lot of times they don't. It'll just come out of the blue that they call, well, I want to talk to Detective Smith. Oh, well, he got promoted, and I'm Detective Jones. I'm now responsible for it. And the family, well, when that happened? Oh, 6 months ago. That's common. So, first of all, a family has to even know that somebody new is responsible for it, and I know that doesn't happen all the time. But as far as getting this new detective more involved than the last one was, that's not easy. It's just not easy. I think that it's going to depend on how old the disappearance is. Of course, if it's a fairly new one within the last couple years, I think a family might be more successful. If it's one that's 50 years old, good luck. I'm just being honest. Once again, I'm always going to be honest with you. I'm not going to blow smoke up anybody's butt or blow sunshine up anybody's butt, whatever that saying is. There's nothing that, there's no words of encouragement, let's put it that way, that can do that. What can do it, and this is the reason that I try to give the guests of Unfound tools, I give them suggestions of what they tell me, things they can do. The best way to get police involved, this will always be the case. April 1st, 2020, April 1st, 2021, April 1st, 2030, April 1st, 25, the year 2371. The number one way to get police interested again is telling them relevant information that they don't know themselves. Number one way. I will never forget this from my own personal experience. There was a disappearance that I was looking into. We have still not covered it for Unfound. But I had found one of the investigators who had worked on this disappearance at one time. This was not the original investigator, and this was not the current investigator. This guy was in between. Let's just say that this disappearance happened in the early 90s, and he was responsible for it, let's just say from like 1999 to 2005, something like that. And I was able to talk to him, track him down, and I talked to him, and he didn't want to tell me much. Just to be honest, good guy, but didn't want to tell me much. Well, what he didn't know is that just because of weird coincidence in my own personal life, is that I had a lot of information, way more than the public had. Once again, coincidence, cannot go into it. Really strange circumstances. And so I started to tell him some of these things, to let him know that I wasn't joking around here. That, you know what, I do know a lot about this case. I'm not just trying to pump you for information. I want you to know that I have my own suitcase of information that the public doesn't have, that I know to be true. And as soon as I could show him that, oh, this guy does know stuff. He's just not trying to pump me for information. He's actually been doing his work. And this guy suddenly became much more open. Even though this is a case we still haven't covered on the program. And I have to admit, I became a little frustrated with the process at some point. So I had to put it on the back burner. That's all I can go into. But what it showed me is that, and it was something that I had suspected, but then I got to experience it firsthand, was that if you do your own work and you can gather information yourself, information that is relevant to a disappearance, and impress police with it, you will certainly get their attention. Certainly. The problem is there aren't too many families out there who are doing that. Instead, they're waiting for the police to do it, or they hire a private investigator that doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and they're paying this person and he's not getting anything done. He's making it look good, but not doing much. Instead, those are the avenues that people usually pick. I am much more inclined to try to get families to do it themselves, even though I know that's more work. I think that they are going to be more motivated. They're not going to take no for an answer. It's free. Them doing their own work is free. And who knew the missing person better than the own family members? So, and the family members are the ones who've been living with it since day one. So all of that put together, that's the way you can get police motivated again, bringing them new information. Otherwise, just calling them and pleading with them and begging them and everything, I'm not convinced any of that works. Next question. Do you feel that disappearances occur more at the hands of someone the victim knows, or do you think a stranger-involved abduction is more common? The FBI has certainly established that people who know each other are much more likely to be victims of each other than anything else. If a woman disappears, most likely this disappearance was caused by a man in her life who she knew. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it was her husband. That doesn't necessarily mean it was her boyfriend, although those are always very good choices. It could be a coworker. It could be a guy that she just ran into once in a while at a bar or something like that. It is certainly not just a guy coming along and kidnapping a woman. And the same is true for men. Men disappear most likely caused by men they knew, or even some women they knew. There's no doubt in my mind about that. That's what the FBI believes, and I think that we've established that on Unfound, that when we look at these disappearances in depth, you can't help but look at the people around that missing person. That's not to say that stranger on strange crime doesn't happen. I mean, probably the best example would be the original Night Stalker who got caught. What was it, last year? Seems like yesterday. Was it last year? Was it 2018? He was a guy who broke into strangers' houses and raped women, and then he progressed on to murder people he didn't know. That is rare. It just is. So that's why we do pay attention to the people who knew the missing person, people who had beefs. And that's why I continue to say the number one way to raise the percentage of you going missing is getting into a relationship, especially if you're a woman. So stranger on stranger abductions, although they happen, a very small percentage. And there was a follow-up question, I'm just seeing this now, to that question. And what percentage involves domestic abuse? Going back to what I said, I think that when you have a missing woman, it makes a lot of sense to look at her husband or her boyfriend. However, that does not mean that there was domestic abuse in the relationship. Oftentimes there is, but sometimes it isn't. I tend to believe that a lot of times what happens in these situations between men and women who are in relationships, yes, some of these guys just are out and out murderers, yes. But I'm also inclined to believe that a lot of these disappearances are crimes of passion, thing that goes too far. People who've been arguing over, maybe not necessarily physically, but maybe emotional abuse. Of course, that's domestic abuse too, but no bruises, no broken bones. And they're arguing back and forth, and each can give out, take and give out as much as the other person. And that particular day, it just went too far. That the guy did get physical, and he meant to hit her. He really wanted to hurt her, but didn't mean to kill her, pushed her, and she went tumbling down the stairs and broke her neck. I think that those situations are common. I'm not trying to give these guys a break. They did kill the woman in their life. But even in our legal system, there's a difference between that and somebody just outright planning somebody's murder, which has happened in many of the cases that we've covered as well. At least that's what I believe. So when it comes to domestic abuse, I guess there was abuse the day that the disappearance happened. But that does not mean that there was abuse before the day that in this case, the woman disappeared. It depends. You just have to look at the facts and see what people are saying. But what percentage? First of all, would have to break down how many of the disappearances which I believe involve relationships, and how many of that, the percentage of that, was from domestic abuse. 50%. I really don't know. I haven't broken that statistic down in the cases that Unfound is covered. I'm going to guess it's probably a lesser percentage than people think. I think that the general idea is that two people in a volatile relationship, that's what most likely leads to women being murdered and them disappearing. I don't know if the statistics bear that out. I don't know. So it's just maybe hard for me to say, but I don't want anybody to think that domestic abuse leads to disappearances. There's not necessarily any proof of that. Likewise, it doesn't mean because people seem to have a perfect relationship and no abuse is going on that either the people in that relationship can't go missing. That can happen too. Next question. I thought this next one was a fascinating question. Got it recently. It's something I've thought about, and this question gave me a chance to it gives me a chance to actually expound on my thoughts. Why is it that it is so difficult to match missing people with unidentified remains on NameUs? Very insightful question. Obviously coming from someone who has tried this. Now, I'm guessing many of you have tried this. If you're listening to Unfound, I'm going to guess at one time or another, you've gone on NameUs, found a missing person, maybe from your area, your state, your city, your county, and then went over to the unidentified remains side of NameUs and started looking around. Does any of these unidentified remains, do the dimensions, the demographics, the race, the height, the weight, the location, could it be this person who went missing from my area? And I've done it as well. I want you to know that, as I stated earlier on the program, I used to do that like 10 years ago. I'd be in the Starbucks just sitting there passing some time, and that's what I'd be doing, and I was never successful. Why is it so hard? It seems like it would be so simple or straightforward. Okay, we got all these missing people over here, and we got, thousands of unidentified remains over here. Surely you can match up column A with column B, fairly quickly. And we know it's not that easy. In fact, I think you'd probably find that very, 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 very few people who have attempted to do that have been successful. Why is that? Well, I think it's at least three prominent reasons, and there could be other reasons as well. Number one, you have to remember that the database for missing people on NameUs is not complete. In fact, it's not even close to complete. It's not even, I don't think, 25% complete. Why is that? That doesn't mean that the people at NameUs are doing a crappy job. I'm not saying that. But entering all this information is not easy. As we've talked about on Unfound, there are many police departments, both local, state, and county jurisdictions that don't put their missing persons cases into NameUs. That's part of it. It's a lot of things put together. All right, first of all. So you can't match up the remains with a missing person if that missing person isn't on NameUs. Likewise, you can only match up missing people if their remains are listed on NameUs. It works both ways. And my impression is we are very, very far behind on either of those sides of that database being totally up to date. We're at least years away. So that's part of it. It's a huge part of it. The other issue, as I have found out, because I've had multiple law enforcement people tell me this, is that a lot on the unidentified remains side, a lot of what you see is guessing. What it may say, white female, you know what? It may not be so. I'm going to guess they can at least get the gender right. But when it comes to the ethnicity, the height, the weight, a lot of times whoever is inputting that information is guessing. And it is especially difficult these days because the way our culture has changed, at least in the United States, where you have many more mixed marriages, which means you end up having mixed race children, which is perfectly fine by me. But in earlier times, before mixed race relationships became socially acceptable, everybody was just 100% white, 100% black, 100% Asian, and that's how science breaks down the different races. Well, when people start mingling races, once again, fine by me, it gets harder and harder to tell when you look at a skeleton whether is that person 30% white, 50% white, 40% African American, 75% Asian, because we know that we all have different skeletal characteristics between the races. Well, when you start intermixing them, you start getting, averages and mixtures of different skeletal types. And it makes it more and more difficult to exactly say. Could be 50% white, 50% black, 25% Asian, 75% African American. You just don't know. So a lot of times when you see the nationality or race, it is a guess. Well, you can then imagine how difficult it's going to be to try to match an unidentified person with unidentified remains, or a missing person with unidentified remains, when the race isn't correct. You're looking for a white guy who's 43 years old. Well, his unidentified remains may be in there, but it may be that they think the guy was Asian. It's possible. I have been told it's possible. So there's that. And and I'm not here to criticize anybody. But I can imagine trying to determine somebody's race on, some bones. I'm guessing that's fairly difficult. And a lot of times you have to remember, as we've known, like from the Tom Brown case, a lot of times they don't have the whole skeleton. They only have 30%, may only have 30% or less. And they have to make a determination from that. It's very difficult. And I will give you an example from my own personal work here in a second, trying to do that years ago. Then I think the third reason that it's difficult, I'm going to say impossible. I'm sure somebody has gotten lucky out there doing, matching a missing person with unidentified remains on NameUs. The third reason is I'm inclined to believe that a lot of those unidentified remains are non-Americans. You have to remember that a large majority of the people who are in NameUs are American citizens. Whereas we know, and I'm not here to get into an immigration debate, but we know that people have, is it snuck or sneaked into this country, have gotten into this country through other means. We know that people have come here on vacations and not gone back to their host countries. People have come here on work visas, and when the visas are out, they don't go home and kind of just vanish into the United States. We know of people who have come here years, decades ago, and who not going through the proper channels, and then had children who are not properly documented, on and on and on. And once again, I'm not here to get into an immigration debate. I know why people want to live here. I love living here. I get it. But what it does from just strictly a missing person's point of view is that you can't match unidentified remains if the person has never been documented in the first place. Moreover, if there was never a missing persons report, on and on and on. So I think that plays a huge role. Or maybe put it this way, you can't look at somebody's skeleton and know if they're an American citizen or not. So that plays a huge factor in not being able to match up unidentified remains with missing persons as well. Those are the three main reasons. I think that's a great question that somebody asked me. Obviously, somebody who's been trying to do it for a while and has not been successful, I share their frustration. And I know about this personally because about 10 years ago, once again, when I kind of got back into, kind of really got interested in Stephen Kocher's missing persons case, because he vanished so close to where I lived, about 7 miles away from where I lived at the time in Las Vegas. While I was working on that, I had also taken an interest in unidentified remains of a man that they now call Sandstone Doe in the coroner's office in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. You can look it up for yourself. It's Sandstone. I have a hard time saying that word. Sandstone Doe. And I thought, well, here we have this remains that were found outside of Las Vegas. It looks like somebody tried to hide the remains. It looks like this man was shot in the back of the head, kind of execution style. I was like, well, and he had like decent clothes on and everything. Well, this should be fairly easy to figure out. Here he's documented. He has these nice clothes on, and it says at the time that it looked like he was in the process of getting a root canal at the time, so he must have some money, everything. Nothing. I worked on that for a couple months, trying to match these unidentified remains with any missing persons case. Could not do it. And I urge anybody, you're listening to this, go do a search, Sandstone Doe out of Las Vegas, and you'll see what I mean. And you'll look at the information and say, well, it seems like it would be fairly easy to figure out. Not so. And so I have firsthand experience of how frustrating it can be on NameUs. But now that I've had a chance to think about it and I do this program, I think I have some insight now on why it is so difficult. Now, you should know, now that I have all this experience, what do I think about sandstone? I'm going to do this again. Sandstone Doe. I'm inclined to believe that he's not an American citizen. There's just something about it that leads me to believe that this is a missing person from some other country. Maybe Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, maybe Ireland, something like that. There's just something about his clothes that he was wearing and the shoes that seems not your usual American style, at least not for when he would have gone missing in the mid-2000s. He would have been murdered in the mid-2000s. So, but maybe you'll take a look at it and you can decide for yourself. I think that's the reason that you can't do it, because NameUs does not have missing people from Germany or Italy or anywhere else on there, only missing people in the United States. And as maybe you don't realize this, but these other countries, although they are very sophisticated and everything, many of them do not have databases like we have in the United States, like we have for NameUs. So it makes it very difficult to go to those databases and see if anybody from those countries went missing and somehow ended up in the United States and ended up getting, shot in the head in Las Vegas. So maybe you'll look that one up and you can tell me what you think. This next question is one I threw in on my own. Why did I do that? Well, because I can, and also because it answers a question that came up a few weeks ago in a disappearance that we covered, and I didn't have a good answer at the time, but I think that I have a good answer now, and I want to pass it along to the rest of you, and I think this also gives you a good idea on how my mind works, because these types of things bother me. And the topic is Alzheimer's and dementia disappearances, where, of course, older people who get these diseases, sometimes they do disappear. Why is it that it took us 170 cases before we ever had a disappearance like that? And that was David Hardy Jr. from just a few weeks ago. Here in March of 2020. Why is that? We've covered all sorts of other types of disappearances in those 170 cases. Why did it take so long for that one? This is a compelling question to me, because I know just every day when I get up in the morning, I Google disappearances that have happened within the last 24 hours, and at least a couple times a week, I run across a disappearance that involves a person with Alzheimer's or dementia, and those are two different diseases. Why? So they are decently common. If I can come across them a couple times a week, then why does it take us 170 cases before we ever feature one on the program? And I've been thinking about that question ever since I found out about David Hardy Jr.'s disappearance and knew that his daughter was going to be joining us on the program. And it wasn't until maybe a week ago that I think I have a theory as to why that is. And the reason is, I think it's because these types of disappearances don't last very long. Most of you know that for us to cover a disappearance on Unfound, it has to be a year old. So if a disappearance happens on January 1st, 2020, it does not become eligible to be on Unfound until January 1st, 2021. And there are a variety of reasons for that I've gone through on the live show, maybe even on a couple episodes, and I've written about it as well, and I don't want to get into it now. But we just have a standard. That standard was created by me way back when Unfound got started. And we continue with that rule to this day, and I don't ever see that rule changing. I think the reason that Alzheimer's cases, dementia cases, don't end up on the program is because most of them get solved before that year, we get to that year. So if an Alzheimer's patient, once again, disappears on January 1st, 2020, they are usually found before January 1st, 2021. Why is that? Well, I think you have to look at these people to understand why that is. First of all, if they do have that disease, they are usually being cared for by somebody. Either they are at home and they have a nurse that's there most of the time, or a family member, a wife or husband, or children, or taking care of their parents who may have the disease, or if they're in the real late stages, they're in a hospital, or if they're somewhere in between, they're in some sort of nursing home, something like that, where once again, there is 24/7 monitoring, or you want to call it surveillance of these people. So that alone makes it, of course, hard for them to disappear. But if they do disappear, it's usually because they wander off when somebody else is looking, somebody who's supposed to be caring for them is looking the other way. For example, Alzheimer's patient is being cared for at home. The nurse goes to the bathroom. While the nurse is in the bathroom, the guy gets up and walks out the front door. You can pick up, you can imagine all sorts of different scenarios. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that when these Alzheimer's dementia people go missing, they're usually, people notice it very quickly that they've gone missing within minutes. That this person, this patient, isn't where he or she is supposed to be. So that certainly helps the search for that type of person. And even if it's like a half an hour, we get to the next part. How far can, I don't know what the average age is of a person that suffers from one of those diseases. Let's just say it's 80 years old. How far can an 80-year-old really go on foot in a half an hour? Not far. Not far. Now, I realize there's some cases that are outside that, and I'll get into that in a second. But I think that's the reason that most of them don't end up on Unfound, because they end up getting solved before they become eligible to be on Unfound, because of the circumstances, because of the person who has gone missing. The traits that they have. They're old. They can't walk very far. They may go missing, but somebody notices that they are missing within, a very, very short time. Unlike, if you really want to go to the opposite end of it, for example, in Eric Franks' case, nobody realized he was missing for 6 months. And that's not very common when these types of people go missing. So I think that's the reason that we haven't covered it. We've only covered one of those types of cases because they just don't get to that year mark. Now, then why was it that David Hardy ended up being on this program, and we know that he had Alzheimer's? Well, I think you have to look at the circumstances. David Hardy was not living the life of an Alzheimer's patient or an Alzheimer's sufferer. He was still going to work. He was allowed to go out and drive on his own. It seemed like he was living his life exactly the way he wanted, just like everybody else, everybody who doesn't have that disease. And on top of that, he had these episodes where he would drive off somewhere and get lost and have to be brought home. And his family kind of just let him do it. You heard it from his daughter herself. There didn't seem to be much that they could do to stop him. They just kind of accepted that that's just the way it was. So although David Hardy had Alzheimer's, he was not living the life of an Alzheimer's sufferer. And that's what caused his disappearance to last longer than a year, and to last as long as it has, almost 3 years. He was living a life that was unique to people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Most of the other people, once again, they're being monitored much more heavily. They're being cared for. They don't have a job. They aren't allowed to drive a car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas David Hardy was doing all those things and was allowed and just continued to live his own life like most Alzheimer's sufferers are not allowed to live. Why? Because they can be a danger to themselves and they can be a danger to others. And I guess what I'm saying is if more Alzheimer's sufferers were allowed to just live the lives without this monitoring and everything else, many more of their disappearances would end up on Unfound because more of their disappearances would last longer than a year. I think that's the reason that David Hardy was the first Alzheimer's sufferer to be on the program. That is a theory. I think that it's based in some very good logic and what we all know about these diseases and how people who have them are cared for. So really, that case really made me think about that, and that is the reason I think that his was the first. There are other exceptions. We know that there are other Alzheimer's sufferers, dementia sufferers, who have walked off and never been seen again. I would have to really look at the details of those cases to really understand why those disappearances have lasted as long as they have. But for the most part, I think that I'm getting it right when I say that most people with those diseases, their disappearances are solved fairly quickly, once again, because of the circumstances. And David Hardy, he was living like myself, except he had a brain disease where probably in retrospect he shouldn't have been allowed to do some of the things that he was doing. And had he been maybe under more tight standards and tight rules, he probably wouldn't have gone missing. Or if he had wandered off, walked away from his house or whatever, he would have been found in a very short time and never been featured on Unfound. Probably. We're almost to the end here. I think I counted this, maybe about 30 questions for this Q&A episode. So we're almost to the end. How do I keep my mind straight? What keeps you from going? What keeps from going through the mental breakdowns? I'll read it again. How do you keep your mind straight? What keeps you from going through mental breakdowns? I've gotten this question before, and I'll answer it again, and it's the same answer that I've been giving for a while. I don't get emotionally wrapped up in these disappearances. That's not why people talk to me or Emily. That's not what these people are looking for from us. That's not, they know that we're not psychiatrists or psychologists. We have no background in that area, even though I think that we have to play that role sometimes. These people are not coming to us looking for a shoulder to cry on. And I have to be frank with you, if they are, then they're probably not going to end up being on the program. We're here to help, but we do a specific thing on Unfound, and I don't want anybody to ever get any other idea regarding that. We are not a psychology show. There's no couch, and I'm not going to start spouting off Sigmund Freud or any other well-known psychiatrist here. We're here to solve problems. And that's what keeps my mind straight. That's why we try to stick to the facts as best we can. I do give the guest an opportunity to talk about what it's been like living with the disappearance for however long it's been. But we are here to talk about the facts, get them out there, put them in the context of why these are the facts and what, how they relate to the disappearance, and, try to figure out if there's anything that can be done. Are there any things that need to be known that aren't, besides just who might have caused the disappearance or where remains are? Of course, everybody wants to know that. But as far as the circumstances of the disappearance, what is missing and what can be still found out, that's why people come to the program. They also come to the program because they know this is an excellent venue for getting word out about a disappearance. And these people, I think, know that I do pretty good interviews, and I'm going to allow them to talk. And they are not going to, their 2-hour conversation is not going to be diced up into, a 10-minute soundbite. This gives them, in fact, I can tell you, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, I know when Monica Button was on the program, Nico Lisi's mother, she came on the program specifically because there were other programs covering her son's disappearance and never contacted her. And she was ticked. That's why she wanted to do Unfound, because she knew she would come on Unfound and she could do all the talking, and I was perfectly fine with that. So, because I do not get emotionally involved, I'm professionally involved. I'm not emotionally involved. Because of that, I don't have the kinds of breakdowns and things that maybe, I guess, the public expects, because I've had this question asked me several times. But that's not the role I'm playing here. It's not the role I'm living, I should say. My role is a reporter and missing persons expert. And sometimes investigator. I think I need to look into things a little deeper on my own. My emotions don't count. My emotions don't matter. So I just try to stick to what does matter. And that's why doing this program, I don't think has affected me mentally, emotionally that much. Maybe I will say that things that I see on TV, maybe I look at a little bit differently now. How murder investigations or cases are treated, especially if they're being treated as entertainment. Things like that. I'm certainly more sensitive to those types of situations now than I was 5 years ago. But I think, that's about it. However, as I've said many times, when I'm not doing Unfound, when I'm not working on Unfound, it's not like I'm listening to other true crime programs, whether on TV or on the internet or anywhere else. When I'm not doing Unfound, I do other stuff. I go work out. I go to trivia night. I go play disc golf. I watch disc golf videos on YouTube. I watch videos about car reviews and things like that. When I'm not doing Unfound, I don't do anything in the way of missing persons at all. Because I think that it is important to take a break to give my mind a rest. Not because I'm being affected by it emotionally or anything, but your mind needs a rest just like the rest of your body needs a rest. Next question. This is the next to last question. We've been going for about 2 hours on here. Okay. This is a long question. What do you think of the new facial recognition photographs that we must have for our driver's licenses? Do you think that this will be an effective tool when it comes to missing people? But then I guess they would have to have a driver's license with this sort of photo. It seems hard for me to believe that we do not have duplicates in facial recognition within the population of the world. Well, first of all, I think when it comes to driver's licenses, each state determines its own criteria for what a driver's license is going to be. Some driver's licenses in some states are very sophisticated and some aren't. So I'm not sure what state this person is talking about. However, I am, familiar with the facial recognition software and this movement that continues to grow and get more sophisticated, and I think, more accurate. It seems that facial recognition is having an effect in some places. But I think that this is a technology that's still very much in its infancy. I know that I've read about facial recognition being used for law enforcement purposes in China. And because people read that, they think, oh, it must, really must be a, something that really works. But then I have to counter, well, you have to remember this is China. It's not the United States. China does not have, people don't have, human rights. There is no Miranda laws there. And, if you've been following any of this COVID stuff, you know how they tried to shut up all these doctors who were trying to send out, the warning about how dangerous this virus could be. What did China do? Made some of them disappear, locked some of them up, and in fact, some of them have died of the very virus because China was denying that it was even going on. So I would be very hesitant when it comes to facial recognition and and how it relates to law enforcement coming out of a country like that. Now, when it's pretty clear that authorities in that country and others are free to do just about whatever they want to do. So I don't know. I think that this is something that is coming, but I do also, on the other hand, don't think that we are to the point of a movie like Minority Report with Tom Cruise, where he's walking through and the cameras are reading his face and directing advertisements in his direction and everything. I think we're a long way from that. And I think that what this person wrote about, with all the population of the world, do we not have duplicate people? I guess we do. On a funny note, I can tell you that I don't know if I've ever told this story. Maybe I've told this story in the live show. I certainly didn't do it in the first Q&A show, I don't think. But several years ago, must have been 2015, maybe, I was at a disc golf tournament in Orlando, and a player came up to me thinking that I was Jason Bateman. Sincerely, 100% believed that I was Jason Bateman and I was in Orlando and I was playing in a tournament, in a disc golf tournament. Now, and since then, it's become kind of a running joke. In fact, just recently, I posted something on my personal Facebook page about, the new series of Ozark, in which Jason Bateman is one of the main actors, a show that I've never seen. I posted something like, for some reason, I still have not gotten any residuals from Ozark. This is riffing off a joke that started like 5 years ago because somebody thought that I was Jason Bateman. And since I've started to tell people about how this happened, people have said, oh yeah, you kind of do look like him. I don't know if I look like him now because I have long hair, but a lot of people think I do look like him. I can see a little bit, but I don't know. So I get what this person is saying, is that sometimes people are mistaken for other people, even to the point where a common, just average person like myself, and that's what I am, was mistaken for a fairly well-known actor in a popular TV show. Go figure. But it was kind of funny. And it helps that Jason and I are around the same age, and I think probably about the same height. But I don't know. So I hear what this person is saying, regarding asking me this question. Well, people look alike, and I have to tell you, I think that we're just a ways off. Now, as far as how this is going, how it could eventually play a role in missing persons cases, it just depends on how prevalent it becomes. If we're going to start putting facial recognition cameras on every street corner, then I think it's going to probably be very relevant. But I don't know if there'll be the technology, the money, the legality, the legal means to do so. And I would remind you that although we do talk about video cameras once in a while on Unfound with missing people being on video camera, it's not a very common topic. Maybe in Crystal Morrison's case, maybe we can think of a few other disappearances where the person was seen on video not long before they disappeared, but not very often. So I have to admit that I don't know if facial recognition is going to play a very big role. Maybe this person is asking, well, if they change their identity, and so now John Smith is going by Larry Brown, and he moved from Pennsylvania to California, and some facial recognition could recognize if the photo, the license is put through some computer for some reason, and it spits something back out. I guess, but getting a facial recognition off a two-dimensional piece of plastic or paper is surely much more inaccurate than the software that could be developed where it's actually 3D. People out walking on the street and a camera is, measuring dimensions, the length of your nose, the width and depth of your face, and all of those things. Certainly two different things. So I think it's a question that's really, really still up in the air, and I think right now a lot of this is just very theoretical. Final question, and it's a good one. What is my eventual vision for Unfound? I love this question because this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, especially since I was due to do a presentation at Northwestern State University tomorrow. Of course, that got canceled because of COVID-19. It's been on my mind a lot because I was going to be doing an interview next week at Nova Southeastern University, which also got canceled. I am very, very hopeful that, and fairly secure in my belief that each of these engagements will be rescheduled for the fall, hopefully when everybody can get back close to normal. We'll see. A lot of health experts are not sure we'll be able to do that. I just don't know. But, and then I've had a couple discussions within the last few weeks with a representative from Northern Michigan, a representative in the Criminal Justice Department from the University of South Florida, which is really good because it's right here in the Tampa area. Both discussions went very, very well. But of course, those talks were about next fall. So the question of the eventual vision for Unfound has been on my mind a lot. And the general answer is that I want Unfound to eventually be a thought leader. Now, where did I get those words? I got those words from my assistant, Natasha. She said that to me a few weeks ago, and I'll bring up why that is in a moment. But I want Unfound to be a thought leader, meaning we want to eventually change the way people think about missing persons cases. Not just the public, but the people who are responsible for those missing persons cases, law enforcement. That's why my desire to speak at campuses is not some type of thing where I go into an auditorium and it's like, kind of show. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to talk about these missing persons cases. And no, although I may have to do that if we can't, it's not my first choice. But that's not really what I'm shooting for. I'm sure there are other podcast hosts who would love to do something like that. And we already know that there are some podcast hosts who already do that tour the United States talking about, their specialty in a kind of show atmosphere. Whereas I'm not interested in a show atmosphere. I'm interested in an educational atmosphere. I want to go into a classroom or online, if that's what we're going to have to do because of this virus, speaking to specific people in specific majors, mainly media, mainly criminal justice, mainly psychology, about missing persons cases and everything that I've learned, and pass my knowledge on to people who will eventually be responsible for missing persons cases and investigating them. And hopefully I can pass on this information, because there's no way they are going to get that sort of knowledge on the job once they become become a sheriff or a deputy or working for the FBI or the Secret Service or state police. They will never get enough experience on the job that will match what I've already learned covering all the disappearances that I've had. I want to be a thought leader, or we want to be a thought leader, with me, of course, being the one that goes out and, does this. Because I am the one that does all the interviews and, of course, gets all the behind the scenes information and does the interviews, and I am the point man for the program, and I'm the guy that started it. But like I said, this could not happen without all of my assistants who have various jobs. And I should say they're all volunteers. They all came to me. I did not go after them. They came to me. And I think that shows that Unfound is doing something right. In fact, I was just writing that. Wrote that recently for Podomatic.com. They have a blog. They wanted me to fill out this questionnaire that became a blog about starting a podcast, the problems you ran into, etc. And one of the things I stated is, you'll know you have a good program when you start getting emails and messages from people asking if they can help you with the program. People only want to be associated with winners. People don't want to be associated with losers. And that all these people, Emily, Cherie, Carrie, Heather, Eric, Natasha, they all came to me. And I'm sure as heck happy to have them. But the vision for Unfound is that we become a thought leader in missing persons cases. It's just not enough to cover these missing persons cases and help these families and get the word out and everything. We want to change people's minds about them. We want to change law enforcement's minds about them. And so I think the next step, the most logical step, as I've already stated, is going to campuses, talking to these students, and using some of Unfound's disappearances as examples, using them as learning tools, not as entertainment, but using them as learning tools. Just no different than that a physics professor would use, for example, the Eiffel Tower to explain architecture or physics and gravity and forces and everything else. These people are missing. They are most likely dead. And the best way to remember them is to use their disappearances so it doesn't happen to other people, and to make investigators better. That's to make sure that these people are not forgotten, is to use their disappearances. So if we could turn back time, that maybe these people wouldn't go missing at all, or their cases would have been solved in a much more timely manner. That is the best way to remember these people. That's the best way to make sure their families know that they did not disappear in vain. Now, what's the next step after that? And this is when Natasha came up with the thought leader term. The next thing I would like to do on top of that is, once again, in the thought leader category, is that, I would like to become the point person for when there are missing persons cases that become national news. I forget this one that happened, a year ago. A girl, I think she was in her teens, went missing. She was remains were eventually found, and she had been murdered. And I unfortunately did not write the name down here. But what do? What do these news channels do? They get some police officer or somebody on there to talk about the investigation. Well, these people, first of all, are not connected to the actual investigation at all, first of all. Second of all, the experience that any of these people have in missing persons cases is very, very little. Why? As I stated earlier, missing persons cases are not common, although they are still important. And even though there are 80, 90, 100,000 unsolved missing persons cases in the United States as of today, there are also 330 million people in the United States. So what the stats tell you, the odds tell you, is that many police officers can go their entire 25, 30-year careers and never encounter a missing persons case that goes longer than a month. Whereas what we need are people who are knowledgeable and experienced in cases that go past that, to 1 year, to 5 years, to 10 years, to 20 years. And getting back to media and being a thought leader, I would like to be the person that Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or any media outlet calls, emails, and says, hey, we're going to be covering this disappearance. Can you come on the program and talk about what, your insights, what you think, what's going on in the investigation, what you've learned? Because seriously, and I'm not here to pat myself on the back, I would know more about talking about that than any of these people that are currently on TV that get asked to talk about this stuff. And then that, once again, it goes from the podcasting world. Of course, we're already, in the publication world with the books. We're already in the video world with YouTube. So what's one of the next steps? The next step is going to those people who are future investigators, talking to them. All right, that's one key. Then you go to the general public where people are watching in the millions, and you talk to them. And that's how you begin to change things, step by step by step. And so that's my eventual vision. But always, there will always be the podcast, there will always be the YouTube channel, there will always be the books, there will always be all these other things. There will always be the website, the new website, theunfoundpodcast.com. But then we get into teaching future investigators. And then we go to even the broader public who don't listen to true crime podcasts, who only know about missing persons cases when it happens to appear in front of their eyes on their national news channel, whichever one they choose. And then you teach them every time you get on there and you are asked to speak about a current missing persons case. That's my vision for Unfound. And that's real change. And that's been my attitude since day one. When I was doing this program by myself with nobody else. I mean, I was working on this program by myself until my first assistant was Emily. She came on, I think, about May 2017. So there was like 8 months there where I did the entire program by myself, finding people, doing everything. And so that was the vision from day one, and it continues to be the vision today. And I'm more than happy to pull everybody else along for the ride, and they're going to do their own work to make sure it happens too, because they all know that, that's on my mind as well. So that's the vision. That is the vision, the eventual vision of Unfound. We want to be thought leaders. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Denzel,
and you've been listening to Unfound.